Hello and welcome into the 247 Sports College Football Show. I'm Cooper Petagna. That's Andrew Ivins, and college football is officially here. Week 0 kicking off in Dublin, Ireland. We got number 10 FSU, and we got Georgia Tech and Haynes King coming off a 7-6 season. Drew, but we got more than that as well. You go down the schedule, we got SMU at Nevada on the network right here, CBS Sports Network, and we got Delaware State at Hawaii. That game kicks off, I think, 11 o'clock Eastern time. So those of you who are jacked up about college football, Drew, week 0, do you have an opinion on it one way or another? Do you like getting a little teaser before week 1, or are you just like it's kind of whatever to you?
Coop, give me as many standalone games as possible. I love it. The opportunity to dig into some of these programs like a Florida State who lost a lot to the NFL draft. I am all for standalone games, and college football needs to look at the Labor Day weekend slate. We should be playing them all day Sunday and Monday, in addition to Friday and Saturday.
All right, hang around. We're going to talk a little Florida State, Georgia Tech at the end of the show. But Drew, it's not always sunshine and rainbows for 5 stars out there. We got some news at Boise State up there in Idaho that Malachi Nelson, the former 5 star in the class of 2023, lost out on the starting quarterback job to the guy they call Mad Max Maddox Matson, the redshirt sophomore, 5'10", all 5 foot 10 inches of him, too much for Malachi Nelson. Drew, it's always interesting, especially now in the day of hyper focused recruiting and obviously the attention that goes with 5 stars and 5 star quarterbacks. But just your reaction to Malachi Nelson, who there are a lot of high hopes for, backed up Caleb Williams, backed up Miller Moss last year at USC before transferring to Boise State. A lot of people thought he was going to be the starter there. That's not the case. What's next for him?
Well, to be honest, Coop, I wish we didn't have 5 stars next to his name when he came out of high school 2 years ago. And usually, when we name a 5 star prospect, we're indicating, hey, we think this guy has a chance to be a future first round pick in the NFL draft. Malachi, he starts at USC, right? I think as a freshman, he was expecting to back up Caleb Williams there in LA. That didn't happen. Miller Moss was the number 2, and Malachi Nelson was on the scout team. So he enters the transfer portal. I think he ends up at Boise State because he thought there was a good chance he was going to be QB1 for the Broncos, and that has not come to fruition. He loses out on the camp battle, so it's disappointing. But Coop, as you know, I mean, the signs were kind of there with Malachi Nelson in terms of, hey, maybe how this guy is wired. Now, we saw him a bunch play in person coming out of the high school ranks. I remember 2 years ago, his team came across the country and played in South Florida, and you could just see it, right? He can make all the throws. He has a good feel for the position and how he moves around in the pocket. But there were some questions about that competitive drive, and it seems like as his college career has progressed, it's still kind of the same story.
Yeah, I thought, what were the lessons learned for us on the ranking side at 24/7 Sports? What's a lesson learned for maybe a guy like Lincoln Riley and the whole some of it of college football? And the other part about this, Malachi Nelson was the first high school football player ever to sign with LeBron James's agency Clutch Sports. How do they look at this, right? How do other agencies look at maybe signing some of the top quarterbacks, top prospects in all of high school football? And as they project 2 Saturdays and beyond without even taking a snap, that financial investment, that's what I think is interesting, Drew. And if you go back over the last couple of years since you and I have been here at 24/7 Sports, and I think you look at some of the misses that we've had, maybe it's a little bit early on guys like Malachi Nelson, Cormani McClain, the former 5 star that transferred from Colorado to Florida already. You go down the list, Chris Marshall at Texas A&M, Keontae Goodwin at Florida. There were certainly signs there. And I think in this NIL era, now more than ever, with the revenue share coming next year, you're going to see teams and especially boosters really start to invest more on the character side. What type of player are we getting? Who are we tying our money to at the end of the day? And I think really that's going to be the biggest revelation, kind of turning point for college football over the next couple years as you see more and more money getting poured in to these players at an earlier stage is, hey, do we have the right kid to fit in this locker room? But that quarterback position specifically, Drew, I think is going to be under a microscope.
Yeah, and you're right, Cooper. And let's say this with quarterbacks. I mean, NFL teams get it wrong and they have all the resources, they have all the money, they get those in person interviews and they can vet the character. They can put these guys on the whiteboard and they still get it wrong. Football, there is a extremely high bust rate. I don't think a lot of people understand that. Sometimes things just don't come to fruition. And you are spot on about where college football roster management is going. You talk with general managers, you talk with directors of player of personnel at these big time schools. I'm talking about the college football regulars. What is the buzzword you hear? Oh, we want tough kids. And they're talking, yes, about the guys that can go out and play with some violence, but they want individuals that are in the building for the right reasons. They can, go through a year on the scout team. They can go through a semester in a developmental lift program, and they're looking towards the goal at the end of the line. So I think you're 100% correct. We're going to see that more and more recruiting just with the free agency, the ability for these guys to enter the transfer portal and the lack of counters. You're spot on. And I think especially at that quarterback position, heck, we're doing it with our rankings in 2026 and 2027. We want quarterbacks that have it between the ears. And I think colleges are looking for the same things.
I think those official visits, Drew, you've mentioned this in the past, but they're going to become more of NFL like in terms of, all right, let's put you on a whiteboard and let's kind of see how you interact from the moment we pick you up from the airport to how you interact with support staff and coaches along the way. We want to make sure that we got the right guy in the building, especially when it comes to dollars and cents. You got to put your name on that at the end of the day. So Malachi Nelson, we'll see what happens with him. Drew, the other thing I'll say before we keep going here, it's an opportunity for Malachi Nelson, right? Miller Moss certainly was not a highly touted recruit coming out. He was a redshirt junior. This was a guy I would have loved to see Malachi Nelson stay another year, battle it out, see what happens through spring and the fall camp. That's not the case. He goes to Boise State and a little bit more humble pie as he gets beat out by another three-star quarterback and a guy, quite honestly, that I think a lot of people are going to learn to respect at Boise State and Maddox Matson. But Drew, without further ado, let's keep it on recruiting. Another five-star off the board. We teased this one last week. Five-star offensive tackle David Sanders from Providence Day in North Carolina off the board to Tennessee. And Tennessee is rolling right now inside the top 7, joined by 6 other SEC programs. Josh Heupel, we've talked a lot about what they can do on the offensive side of the football. We've talked a lot about what they got cooking in that quarterback room. Talk about investment, Drew. This seems to be like a smart and sound investment by Josh Heupel, locking down your corner protector for the next 3 to 4 years.
Since 247 Sports has started ranking players back in 2012, Cooper, there has been 43 offensive tackles that have finished with 5-star status. Only 23 programs have been able to land one of these guys, most of them ending up at Alabama, ending up at Georgia, Stanford, Wisconsin. David Sanders is the third 5-star tackle for the Volunteers in the modern recruiting era. The other two, both now playing in the NFL, Darnell Wright, Trey Smith. So this is monster in that sense. And then, Cooper, I think the other thing about David Sanders is he is a perfect fit for what Tennessee wants to do on offense. We're talking about a kid that is over 6'5". He's got long arms. He's a reactionary athlete. He is athletic enough to, clear space on screens. And his reactionary skills, how he moves in pass protection, it fits Tennessee's offense. Spread you out, throw it around, up tempo, NASCAR. I think David Sanders, this is the perfect marriage for him. And for the Volunteers, it's kind of been the same story really over the past year, Cooper. The 3 Ps: passers, pass protectors, and pass rushers. They just keep loading up at those positions. We've seen what they've done at quarterback. Nico Iamaleava this season. They got George McIntyre committed. Brandon Faison, our number 1 ranked prospect in the class of 2026. James Pierce is already there in Knoxville. You got Jordan Ross, a 5-star defensive lineman that they signed last year. Now they got a franchise tackle. And Coop, the other thing with David Sanders, hey, if they went after a guy that we think David Sanders could be in the transfer portal, it would come with a hefty sticker price.
All right, well, let's set this up a little bit. A lot of people look at Tennessee and they think of Nico Iamaleava, but after that, Drew, you got some highly touted guys coming through that door. Jake Merklinger already there as a true freshman. You got guys like George McIntyre, Faison Brandon in 2026. This is a room set up for success. So to lock down that left tackle, and let's not forget they just brought Lance Hurd over from LSU, the former five-star as well, and a guy that they're really excited about. So they are setting this up for the long haul. Drew, the other thing I want to mention on David Sanders, because I know you're a huge fan of this kid, obviously the number one offensive tackle in the country. There are a lot of teams that probably would have taken him as a defensive lineman as well. 7 sacks last season, 32 pressures, North Carolina Gatorade Player of the Year. This guy can get it done in a multitude of ways, not to mention he played the majority of a season through a torn labrum. I just watched his first game from this past week against Trinity Christian. He was still playing defense. I think that says a lot about his temperament. Drew, moving on, bigger picture, we talked a little bit about 6 teams in the top 7 of the 2025 composite team rankings per 247 Sports. 6 of those teams are from the SEC. And it just shows you the parity and the competitiveness of that conference. But you and I have been talking about this for a couple of years now. Tennessee seems to be kind of itching their way. If you were going to have Georgia, Texas, maybe a team like Alabama and Kalen DeBoer in Tier 1, it seems like Tennessee is kind of knocking on that door.
Coop, if we were to put these in tiers, right, I think you could put Georgia in its own class, right? So they're the kings in the SEC, and then I think you have another tier after that. Up to debate here. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I would put Alabama, Texas, LSU, right? That's kind of your second tier. And then I think that third tier is Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Auburn, Florida, Oklahoma. Now, I think there's some teams, depending on how it goes this season, what happens with their sitting head coach. But I think that's kind of the third tier. And that's where I would also have Tennessee. I think if they can continue to keep recruiting this way, could they potentially rise into that second tier with the Alabama, with the Texas, and with the LSU? And I think it's been a while since we have thought about Tennessee in that sense.
Ball's getting it done, not only on the recruiting trail, big year coming up on the field as well for Josh Heupel and company. Hey, it's not Friday, but we got a Freaks List, Freaky Friday coming up next, right after this break. My favorite time of the year, Drew. Preseason list, true freshman, All-American, all those coming out right now as we're a week away from college football. But also, the Freaks List by Andrew Ivins comes out this Wednesday on 247sports.com. And we are blessed and highly favored that we have Andrew Ivins right here with us today to kind of discuss this a little bit. But Drew, let's give a little bit of a background for those who maybe not be as familiar with the Freaks List. Year 4 that you've been doing this and been collecting this data, and kind of something that you have, I would say, built upon Bruce Feldman with the Athletic that he's done a tremendous job on. You've brought that to high school football and the scope of college football. But give us a little background for the viewers out there that are maybe getting acclimated and acquainted with what the Freaks List is.
Yeah, I have to, number one, tip the cap to Bruce Feldman. I mean, one of my favorite things I've always read, Cooper, is him listing off all the freaky things that college football stars can do. And I thought a couple years ago, hey, why don't we do this with the high school ranks? And maybe some of the guys that we highlight will make it to Bruce Feldman's list. And that has been the case. Nick Harbor, Freaks List alum from 2 years ago. He's the back-to-back number 1 freak for Bruce Feldman. And he kind of really leads off this list of some of the guys, Cuba. I know you recognize some of these names up here. Malachi Starks at Georgia, rumored to be a first-round pick. Hey, Travis Hunter, the two-way star, Harold Perkins, Isaiah Bond in the transfer portal. And Coop, I think what makes my list unique is I'm not just trying to get the 5-star prospects on there, right? I want to get into the group of 5 ranks and maybe some players that the average college football fan has never heard of. Thomas Castellanos, you see him right up there, the quarterback at Boston College. You know, he ran for over 1,000 yards this past season. And I think on Labor Day, when Boston College travels to Tallahassee to take on Florida State, everyone's going to realize how athletic Thomas Castellanos is. And the reason why he was on the Freaks List many moons ago is because he scored 16 goals on the soccer field as a junior there in Georgia. So it's a project I love. It takes a lot of work, but it's cool not only to see these guys have success on Saturdays, but then again, you know, show up on Feldman's list a few years later, and then potentially you get them at the NFL scouting combine. and then, hey, maybe they're getting drafted one day.
Always love the stories of the freaks list. Guys on there that, maybe play an exotic sport, if you want to call it that. We've seen golf, we've seen hockey, we've seen a lot of different things, stories that you have from the All-American Bowl during your time there. How much has this really kind of helped you during the scouting process as well as you're putting together the top 247 with the rest of the team at 247 Sports, where you dig in on a guy and maybe you find a nugget or two that you didn't know beforehand. And you say, wow, that's pretty interesting. Not only is that a caveat, but that's something that we really value in the scouting process as well.
All the time, right? And there was guys I came across this weekend when I was working on the list where it was, oh, a 3-star prospect now. They might be a 4-star prospect a few months down the line. So I think the other thing too is just learning the stories on these kids, and it allows you to, kind of tell the average fan who they are, what they do. Coop, I went back and I read last year's list, and we've talked so much about Cam Coleman, the freshman wide receiver at Auburn, who we anticipate to have a monster senior season. Number one, totally forgot he was committed to Texas A&M for a good chunk of the recruiting process. The second thing, he won a dunk contest in Dabo Sweeney's house during his official visit to Clemson. And it feels like we've been talking about Cam Coleman for so long and what he's going to do there at Auburn. But that was, I thought, an interesting twist on his story that I had to really recall and find it in print when I'd written that a while back.
Cam Coleman, with just the hype, and obviously as long as you and I have been covering it, it feels like he's been in college football for 2 years. So we talked a little Cam Coleman. Now we're going to talk a little bit of Cam Coleman a little bit later in the show. But Drew, let's tease a couple players that could make this list that you expect to be on the list. And let's start with one of the top ones, Jonah Williams. Is he a safety? Is he a linebacker? It's a bird. It's a plane. You don't know what it is, but Jonah Williams is one of those guys that can do a multitude of things. Maybe one of my favorite players in this cycle. Tell us why you love this kid.
Is he a safety? Is he a linebacker? How about, is he a first-round pick in the NFL draft, or is he a first-round pick in the MLB draft? Jonah Williams out of Texas. He is 6'3", 200 pounds. This is a kid that can punch it, as you see right there on the hardwood, but he's also a really, really talented baseball player. He plays center field, but he can also throw and pitch, and he's hit 94 miles per hour on the mound this summer as a lefty. Another interesting nugget I picked up, he can get from from home plate to first base in 3.52 seconds, Coop. The average time in the major leagues right there is 4.2. Flipping over to the football field, I think his stats are wild. We have not discussed this enough. Over the past 2 years, 6 pick sixes. He has scored 8 times in the return game. He's got 100+ tackles, over 800 yards of offense, 14 more touchdowns. And we're not done there. That's just his first 2 acts. This is a kid that also ran track for the first time this offseason, qualified for regionals in the 200-meter dash. I mentioned the basketball, all-district defensive MVP as a junior this past winter. And then the testing profile, 4.53 in the 40-yard dash, 4.3 in the short shuttle. Those are some of the top markers, according to our friends at the UC report, when we're talking about players over 200 pounds. I've been searching for a player comp here, Cooper. I've had every name thrown at me. Sonny Styles at Ohio State, Isaiah Simmons back when he was at Clemson. The one I kind of really like, Chad Jones. Remember, the former defensive back for LSU, helped the Tigers win a national title, and then he helped them win a College World Series as a relief pitcher coming out of the bullpen, eventually selected in the 3rd round of the NFL draft. So Jonah Williams, one of the favorite ones, and he's going to be announcing a commitment this upcoming Friday, according to Mike Roach at 247 Sports. Texas A&M, LSU, Oregon, USC all involved. Doesn't sound like anyone has any idea which way he's leaning. Heck, he could be playing baseball.
It's hard to put into context everything that you just said. Translation, this guy is one of the most unique athletes I think you and I have seen in quite some time. The Chad Jones player comparison, Drew, you know the way to my heart as an LSU alum. Chad Jones, one of my favorite players of all time, growing up, watching him in Louisiana, seeing what he could do, not only between the white lines, but on the diamond as well. dynamic athlete. I think one of the most storied athletes in all of LSU's history. That's saying a lot. Obviously, had the injury in the NFL, and glad he's healthy from that. Didn't return to form, but Chad Jones is definitely a very specific player comparison for a guy like Jonah Williams. Jonah Williams coming off the board Friday. We'll see what happens there. Drew, a couple other names as well we want to mention. Let's start with one of the more polarizing prospects in this entire class. Quarterback Duce Knight out of the state of Mississippi, currently committed to Marcus Freeman in the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. There's been a lot of conversation whether or not he's going to stick, but let's talk about the athlete. The more you dig into this guy, the more there is to like. We haven't seen a guy like him at the quarterback position and God knows how long. It's been a really, really long time.
So at the Elite 11 regional in Mississippi back in the spring, he had a 42.5-inch vertical jump. That would be a combine record for the quarterback position. Anthony Richardson set it 2 years ago at 40 inches. And, I think sometimes when we see these testing metrics, okay, it might be a little bit faulty. Who knows if that's the actual number? Well, at the Irish Invasion, so that's Notre Dame's legitimate, big time summer camp. A few months ago, Duce Knight, 128 inches in the broad jump. That was a hair short of Anthony Richards' 129-inch broad jump at the NFL Scouting Combine. And that, too, was a record. This is a two-time state champ in the high jump. He also won a gold medal as a junior in the long jump. He is bouncy. He's explosive. Left-handed quarterback, Coop, that is 6'4", 205 pounds, and he goes 4.5 in the 40-yard dash. We always talk about Notre Dame and how do they take the next step forward, especially with the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams. I think Duce Knight is a lottery ticket with a monster payout because there's just not a lot of quarterbacks that can do what he can do with his legs and his arm and explosiveness.
Unicorn at the position for sure. Huge gift for Marcus Freeman. We'll see if the Irish can hold on to Duce Knight. Just a reminder, Andrew Ivins' Freaks list comes out on Wednesday on 247sports.com. The stars of tomorrow, all highlighted right here. College football season predictions coming up after the break. College football is less than a week away, and that means it's time for some season predictions. And Drew, I'm excited about this one. Let's start with the Heisman. The water is warm. You and I have been talking about this throughout the entire offseason. Who's going to win this thing? You've been looking at the betting odds. You know this thing is kind of wide open. Carson Beck seems to be the favorite right now with Georgia. Drew, I'm going to go with Cam Ward, Miami. I went back. I doubled back on this. Watched a lot of tape last night from his time at Washington State. I'm fired up. I was fired up about the acquisition for Mario Cristobal. I'm fired up for Miami going into year 3 under Mario. And Cam Ward, to me, Drew, seems to be the guy that is just kind of the turnkey operator. You plug him into a very talented team, both offensively and defensively. Not only do I think that this guy can be the true difference maker at this position that could potentially lead Miami to the playoffs, if you were looking at some betting odds for a potential number 1 draft pick, maybe outside of those very popular names, I put some money on Cam Ward as well. Drew, I love this kid. The more that I watch, the more I'm invested in him. There's some things he's got to clean up. A little loose with the football sometimes, but outside of that, the playmaking ability, he's a magician. I asked my wife, I said, I need a word to describe Cam Ward just in terms of what he can do on a football field, how he extends plays. That's what we came up with, the magician. But Cam Ward, Drew, I think there's a lot of kind of wait and see opinion out there. They got Florida week 1. After that, he's either going to be a guy that showed up in that moment or he's going to be the guy that a lot of people think he can be. I think the time is now for Cam Ward in Miami. I'm putting my money on Cam Ward to win the Heisman in 2024.
I love that pick, Coop. And I think the other thing you need to point out that if Cam Ward had entered the NFL draft a couple months ago, he probably would have been a day 3 selection. So when you posed this question, all right, prediction for your Heisman Trophy winner, I would have had Cam Ward as well. I'm going to go in a different direction, though, because we don't need to double up here. I'm going to go with Carson Beck, the odds-on favorite. You look at the past 14 Heisman winners, 12 of them have played quarterback. So Devontae Smith in 2000 or 2020, Derrick Henry in 2015. Those are the only non-quarterbacks. And I worry a bit about how much they might want to run the football there in Athens with the addition of ETN. But they do have some weapons for Carson Beck. I think Oscar Delp, the tight end, everyone's talking about the veteran they brought in from Stanford. I'm buying stock in Oscar Delp. I think he's going to have a big season. It's got Arian Smith, Colby Young, who comes in from Miami, London Humphreys, who comes in from Vanderbilt. I think it's Carson Beck's to lose. And I think Georgia, they are going to make an early statement against Clemson. You look at the schedule, I think Carson Beck statistically is going to put up a big year. So like your Cam Ward pick, I also had Carson Beck. And then two more quarterbacks, Cooper. Caden Salter at Liberty. You want to talk about betting odds? I think I saw somewhere out there this morning plus 20,000. Liberty doesn't play anyone. And I think Caden Salter could put up some video game-like numbers. The other one that stands out to me, Jalen Milroe, plus 1,400. Jalen Milroe finished sixth in Heisman voting in 2023. He had 4 first-place votes. So those are 2 more that stood out to me when trying to handicap this race for the Heisman.
Yeah, good offensive line there in Tuscaloosa. I think the only part that maybe gives you a little bit of hesitation is that receiving core. Ryan Williams, we've talked about, the 5-star freshman, should be a senior in high school, is going to have to step into some big shoes. They bring back some other pieces as well. Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice. There's enough there for Jalen Milroe to really kind of establish himself as one of the premier players in college football. Drew, the other thing that's interesting about the Heisman conversation is I feel like now, because it's a 12-team playoff format, it kind of broadens the scope a little bit, right? What if Caden Salter runs the table? Liberty, they're the highest ranked group of 5 team at the end of the day, and they're in the playoffs. It gives guys like that a little bit more oomph in that conversation in New York at the end of the day. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. That's what I'm betting on with Miami. If they can win the ACC, get in that 12-team playoff, I think all eyes on Cam Ward. Certainly at the end of the day, he can turn a lot of heads there. So Cam Ward, Carson Beck, our 2 picks for the Heisman in 2024. How about Coach of the Year, Drew? I'll give you the tee box on this one because this one ended up being a lot more difficult than I think you and I ever anticipated.
It is, because Coach of the Year award really is kind of an overachievement award. You look at the past 5 winners of the AP Coach of the Year. Kalen DeBoer in 2023, he gets Washington to the title game. Sonny Dykes in 2022, he gets TCU to the title game. It was Jim Harbaugh in 21, Jamie Chadwell in 2020, then Ed Orgeron in 2019. So I think it's a lot of coaches that get the most out of their roster. So for me, I mean, as much as I wanted to say, hey, Ryan Day at Ohio State, I don't think that is giving me good odds to get it right. So I went with Dave Doeren at NC State. NC State won 5 of their past 6 games or their last 6 games to close out last year. Added Grayson McCall, the quarterback from Coastal Carolina, via the transfer portal. Also got Duke running back Jordan Waters, Noah Rogers, former blue chip recruit, comes in from Ohio State. I think NC State, when you look at the schedule, Cooper, they could be favored in 10 of 12 games. They face Tennessee week 2. That'll be in Charlotte, and then they got to go to Clemson. But outside of that, the schedule is very manageable. And the other thing, they play just 2 games outside of the Carolinas, at Cal, at Georgia Tech. I mean, heck, they could drive to Atlanta. And if they make the ACC title game, that's also in Charlotte, a stadium they'll see in week 2. So to me, with it being a 12-team playoff, NC State, what they bring back, they do lose a lot of key pieces on the defensive side of the ball, but I think the offense is going to be better. And I think NC State could be a surprise team. So that's why I went with Dave Doeren.
Tennessee, Clemson, first 4 weeks of the season. I think if you split that series, they're in a pretty good spot there to make the college football playoff. Drew, I can't argue with your pick there. How about mine? I had to say a little prayer when I went over this one. Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. I just think now is the year. They have all the pieces. You got Riley Leonard at the quarterback spot. You got Mike Denbrock coming over from LSU, experience on the defensive side of the ball, Xavier Watts, Benjamin Morrison. This is what it's been building up towards in South Bend over the last couple years in the Marcus Freeman era. And Drew, they got the pieces, they have the depth. I think there's some question marks, obviously, on the offensive line. The receiver position is going to have to figure some things out, but they are talented now with the playoff expanding by 8 teams to make a run. And I think their schedule obviously sets up in a really good spot. The biggest question mark is going to be that first game in the season in College Station against Texas A&M, and versus a guy that's got a lot of familiarity with that program in Mike Elko. And Drew, the thing that you and I keep harping on, that offensive line versus a vaunted, very talented defensive line there in College Station. Can they hold up? We've seen injuries to Charles Jagasaw. They're trying to get some things worked around in the offensive line. Is it going to be Emil Wagner? Is it going to be Tosh Baker? Is it going to be one of the young freshmen in Anthony Knapp that's going to emerge? They're going to need somebody to step up. But I like Notre Dame. I like Marcus Freeman. If he can get him to the CFP, I think he's going to have as good of an argument as any. All right, Drew, a couple more categories before we get to our next segment. Breakout Player of the Year. This one was a little bit of a cupcake layup for me. Avery Johnson, the guy we call Sunshine, MVP of the Pop-Tart Bowl. I mean, man, you talk about dynamic, a guy that we love to watch. Will Howard is playing for one of the top 3 teams in the country, and it's because Avery Johnson forced him out of there. Avery Johnson, if you're not familiar with that name, go back, watch his game against NC State in the postseason. You'll learn everything that you need to know. Drew, I think he's going to have to step up from a passing standpoint, but it wasn't long ago. You and I had the discussion, is he even a quarterback? He's grown leaps and bounds at the position. If he can keep up that type of trajectory, I think he's going to be fine.
Coop, my breakout player of the year, Justice Haynes, running back at Alabama. Crimson Tide lose both of their top ball carriers, one to the transfer portal, the other to the NFL draft. Justice Haynes, I think he's kind of become a forgotten man there. This was the number 3 ranked running back in the class of 2023 behind Cedric Baxter and Reuben Owens, both those guys out for the year. We saw a little bit of Justice Haynes in the college football playoff against Michigan. I think the Crimson Tide strength is that offensive line. I think we could see Justice Haynes running for over 100 yards a lot of times this season with Tyler Booker, Caden Proctor blocking for him up front.
All right, last category here. No surprises, Drew. Who's your rookie of the year?
I feel like we flipped here. I'm going Cam Coleman, the wide receiver at Auburn. We bring it up all the time. Tigers have not had a 1,000-yard wide receiver since 1999. Cam Coleman, we saw him in the spring game, 4 catches, close to 100 yards. This dude is a freak. I think he's going to unlock some things, putting a lot of faith in Peyton Thorne, but someone's going to have to move the chains for the Auburn Tigers, and I think it's going to be Cam Coleman.
I'm going Jeremiah Smith. Big surprise. Number 1 player in the class of 2024. Drew, I love this kid. You love this kid. You scouted him for a while. I compared him to Julio Jones. I don't think there's any going back from that, so I got to stick with that. So Cam Coleman, Jeremiah Smith. If you're not familiar with those names, you got about a week to get familiar with them. College football right around the corner. We got some more fall camp buzz right after this break. Fall camp is not over yet. I know week 0 is right around the corner, but we still got some fall camp buzz. And thanks to our friend Chris Hummer at 247 Sports, we can always look forward to his headlines every week. And Drew, we talked about Marcus Freeman, my coach of the year candidate, my coach of the year pick, quite frankly, and what week 1 looks like. Well, he's got his hands full. And after I read Hummer's report, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to keep this pick. Ended up staying with it. But the reason I'm a little nervous is because Texas A&M's defensive line looks like it's turning a lot of heads, and for good reason, Drew. I mean, you go down the list. DJ Hicks, former 5-star. Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, another former 5-star. They bring in Nick Scourton at double-digit sacks at Purdue last season. That's not to mention guys like Malik Silla as well. They got some depth. Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy. You can go down the list there, Drew. Is this a shock to you? I kind of expect this to be one of the best units in all of college football.
I have that week 1 game circled, Cooper, against Notre Dame, because I think it could be much like what we saw last season when North Carolina squared off with South Carolina. The Gamecocks couldn't block anyone. And I think with Notre Dame, given the struggles, given the guys that have left and what they have to replace at the tackle spots with the injuries, I think Texas A&M is absolutely going to tee off. And the other thing that stands out about the depth and what Hummer wrote is, remember that 2022 recruiting class for the Aggies under Jimbo Fisher was the highest ranked recruiting class of all time. Now, some of those guys have left, but some of the pieces are still there. And that's the benefit of bringing in elite talent from the high school ranks, allowing those guys to develop. That is the strength of Texas A&M's roster, that defensive front.
Mike Elko, defensive-minded coach. Obviously, to be able to inherit this group certainly puts Texas A&M and Elko in a position of strength. That is going to be the matchup there that everybody's going to have their eyes on. Point of attack, offense, defensive line, Texas A&M versus Notre Dame, one of the most highlighted games of Week 1 this college football season. All right, Drew, staying in the SEC, let's talk about Ole Miss. And I think a lot of people give a lot of attention to the portal king, Lane Kiffin, but you and I, because we study the high school side, know that they've been getting it done on the high school side as well in those ranks. And two guys that we liked a lot coming out of high school were William Eckles and TJ Banks. And Drew, they're turning heads through camp. Defense coordinator Pete Golding seems pretty confident that he's going to be able to get both of these guys on the field this year and pretty early. But let's start with Will Eckles. I mean, you talk about a story, a guy that played guard center for us at the All-American Bowl. I think there are a lot of conversation. He's going to play offense, he's going to play defense. Ole Miss being one of the only teams to offer him an opportunity to play on the defensive side of the ball. Drew, they think he can be a dominant force at the next level. This shouldn't be any surprise at all.
It's not, Cooper. And I heard from someone on staff there, this was a few weeks ago, that they thought he was the most impressive freshman that they've had in a while. And you mentioned it, him playing offense at the All-American Bowl. I'll never forget calling Will Eckles right after the Alabama-Mississippi game saying, hey, we got a spot in San Antonio. The only issue is we need you to play offense and not defense. And he had no issues doing it. And I think Cooper, he's kind of one of those rare linemen where there's a chance that, hey, maybe at some point down the line, even in this transfer portal era, maybe we do see him on the other side of the ball. But I think it's extremely encouraging if you're an Ole Miss fan that Will Eckles is ahead of schedule. TJ Banks, to me, Coop, I know someone you're super familiar with, big-framed defensive back. I remember he was an instant eye catcher at the Under Armour All-America game in Orlando at the tail end of his senior season.
Big, long kid. I think you could play him on the perimeter. I think Ole Miss is kind of toying with the idea to play him at that nickel position. I think a guy that's very comfortable in run support, doesn't mind physicality. Two big pickups for Ole Miss as you got to continue to recruit the high school ranks. Lane Kiffin showing why. All right, Drew, let's talk about one of our favorite players last cycle in the 5-star tight end, Luke Reynolds at Penn State. Not sure if you've seen a picture of his hair lately. Looking a lot like Joe Dirt, making a lot of preseason All-American lists for the true freshman. This kid already up 25 pounds. I think you and I are not shocked at this at all. Up to 241 pounds. Drew, we know that Penn State likes to use their tight ends a lot, 12, 13 personnel. It seems like James Franklin is kind of in that position right now where he said, you know what, Luke Reynolds is going to play. We don't know how much he's going to play. Is it 4 games or is the red shirt coming off? Not a surprise for us. This kid, the inline ability, his ability to flex out in the passing game as well. I think that's what it's going to come down to. Can he be a neutral asset when you put him in a run situation? That being said, Luke Reynolds, Drew, buying all the stock. You know the Oyster Boys are very, very excited about the prospect of what Luke Reynolds can do at Penn State.
Coop, does he redshirt, yes or no? I'm going no.
I'm going no, too. I'm right there with you.
All right, we're holding it to you, James Franklin. No, this was our darling last cycle, Cooper, and I think for everyone that wants to be a talent evaluator or trying to sort these kids in the high school ranks, why do we like Luke Reynolds? Well, he was a former quarterback that was making the transition to tight end. You look at the NFL, all those big frame pass catchers, all the guys stretching the field, most of them were not tight ends in high school. They're playing another position. Luke Reynolds also got it done at safety, super physical. He was just awesome to be around. And I think for Penn State with the new offense, Drew Aller, they need to get him some weapons. And hey, if that means 13 personnel we're going to throw out of these 3 tight end sets, then I'm all for it. Maybe that is the answer for Penn State and how they can exceed expectations here in 2024 and potentially make a run to the college football playoff. I think of Luke Reynolds, they can get him a little bit more ready for point of attack play there in the Big Ten. I think that's also going to help out those running backs, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton.
All right, we mentioned Chris Hummer's 247 Sports Fall Camp Report. Like I said, you can find that on 247sports.com. But he's not done. He's a busy man. He's got a true freshman All-American list coming out later this week on 247sports.com. Drew, he's given us the opportunity to tease a couple names, and a guy that I know you're fired up about, another former 5-star, about the edge rusher at South Carolina, Dylan Stewart.
Yeah, I feel like Dylan Stewart is someone that hasn't been discussed anywhere when we talk about these true freshmen and guys that can make an impact right away. It's normally all the wide receivers we're discussing, but Dylan Stewart, I went back in my notes, went back to what I wrote coming out of the Under Armour All-America game. Cooper, I said, if anyone belonged on an NFL field right now, it was Dylan Stewart. He looked like an action figure. What's crazy is he posted his physical transformation since he arrived there in Columbia, and he is even more rocked up now. I think this is someone with South Carolina and Shane Beamer. He needs to show a little bit of the future. I think Dylan Stewart is a guy that has a chance to get after quarterbacks right away in the SEC. So certainly name to know. Think about some of these other pass rushers the Gamecocks have had in the past, Jadeveon Clowney, Jordan Burch. I think Dylan Stewart could be right up there in the same breath with them.
All right, keep an eye out for Hummer's article that comes out later this week, like I said, on 247sports.com. All right, Drew, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, we'd be madmen if we didn't talk about week 0 here. And let's talk about it. Florida State, the number 10 team in the country, taking on Georgia Tech, a sneaky good matchup to start off the season in Ireland. Drew, Florida State lost 10 players to the NFL draft. They're coming off a season that had a lot of highs and one low at the end of it, missing out on a college football playoff appearance. What are you looking forward to in this game?
For me, wide receiver. Who catches passes there for the Seminoles? Keon Coleman's gone off to the NFL. Johnny Wilson is also now in the league. I think that is one of the biggest storylines of week 0. We know Florida State returns a front in the offensive line. They got some good running backs, a new quarterback, DJU, coming in. But who's going to catch passes? Is it Malik Benson? Is it Hakeem Williams, who has been hurt? Is it Jaylen Brown, the transfer from LSU? Is it Kentron Portier? The other thing, Cooper, I want to see this Florida State secondary. I really like it on paper. Azariah Thomas, Ventrell Cypress, Earl Little, Kevin Knowles, Conrad Hussey, KJ Kirkland. I think that is a sneaky good unit for the Seminoles. What about you? What are you keeping your eye on here in week 1 or week 0?
DJ Uiagalelei, right? We talk about the transfer portal, the impact of the quarterbacks, like musical chairs. And DJU, Florida State felt pretty convicted in their pursuit of DJU. And this is a guy that's played a lot of football dating back to his time in the ACC at Clemson, goes to Oregon State, plays 1 year under Jonathan Smith, now at FSU. Drew, he's an experienced quarterback, and he's grown a lot. But how high does DJU really take Florida State's ceiling? That is the biggest question mark for me. Is this a guy you win with or because of? And I think it's more of a guy that you win with, not because of. Jordan Travis really developed into that guy that was an amplifier for Florida State and for Mike Norvell, what he could do with his legs. So the biggest question mark for me is not only that production that you have to replace on the receiving core outside of Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, but what about the quarterback position? And can this guy make you that much better in your pursuit to go win a college football playoff and potentially a national championship? That's the biggest question. So Georgia Tech, Florida State, they face off this Saturday, an early morning game, noon Eastern time on ESPN. Guys, like I said, you can find everything you need to know about college football recruiting on the 247 Sports YouTube channel. We appreciate you guys joining us. As always, for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. We'll see you next week.